Be strong.
Continuing from where we left off, we see the third prince taking his battle stance and holding up his sword, determined to fight with everything he's got. A powerful surge of aura surrounds him, implying that he's loaded himself up for the next stage of the duel. Our genius swordsman sees this and instantly confirms that Grier de Orwin is using the Peer's sword technique. He knows that it's a move only passed down to the successor of the Orwin kingdom, and as such, he's now certain that the prince's next attack will contain every ounce of energy he can muster. However, our boy already has a countermeasure in place for when this happens, and it is revealed to us that he's already memorized all of the sword techniques that the third prince used. Prepared for any move that can be used against him, the genius swordsman grips his own blade and infuses it with his aura until it activates the Thousand Flames technique First Flame, called cyclotorsion. This move causes a powerful wave of flames to whirl around Leon's sword, and then he points the blade at Grier de Orwin, confirming that he's also ready for the next round of their duel. The third prince sees this and is immediately terrified, because he realizes that his opponent is actually using a rare and powerful golden flame aura. As terrified as the prince might be, he refuses to give up, claiming that he still has a seemingly clutch technique at his disposal. So, he musters all the courage and strength he can to land the powerful sword strike, looking to finish off our boy with just this one swing. Leon, on the other hand, performs his own counterattack to block the prince's slash, and as the two heavyweights clash swords, a massive explosion of aura erupts, creating blasts with blinding light. Within the huge blast, we see the two swordsmen giving everything they've got and pushing their aura to the limit. This battle of grit and wills continues for a while, and in the process, Leon's foot slips as he gets pushed back by Grier de Orwin's force. The prince instantly notices this, realizing that he now has the upper hand in battle. At the same time, we see a very strained look on our genius swordsman's face, implying that he's struggling and having a very hard time in the fight. Regardless, he doesn't relent in his attacks, and equally musters all the strength he can to overpower the prince. Thankfully, his efforts are not in vain, because all of a sudden, we see that the blonde prince's sword has been shattered, and the look of horror on his face confirms that he already knows he's lost. The blue-eyed prince almost can't believe it when he sees the broken pieces of his sword floating in the air. He realizes that his aura can no longer save him, and while he's still coming to terms with the unfortunate turn of events, Leon takes advantage of the situation. He suddenly asks the dazed prince if he's also going to deflect his next attack, and before the blonde noble can even process the question, he receives a sword strike to the body, courtesy of the genius swordsman. Our boy displays impeccable precision and skill with his attack, all while looking like he has ice in his veins. The moment he strikes Grier de Orwin, his name is announced, and as the defeated prince falls to his knees, the red-eyed swordsman is declared the winner of the final round. The disappointed prince just stares at his broken blade, thinking of how he definitely had the upper hand in speed and strength during the fight. Obviously, that wasn't enough to guarantee the win, because now he's the one kneeling in defeat with half a sword in his hand. The loss is so unbelievable that Grier de Orwin even starts wondering if his opponent used his footwork to respond to his aura. At this point, the guy doesn't even know what to think, so he just accepts the defeat with a small smile and admits that the thing he heard about the world being big is true after all. Leon overhears him making this vague statement, and it catches his attention, so he turns to the third prince. Looks like the prince is an honorable person after all, because he seems to have taken his defeat in stride. In fact, he even goes ahead and thanks our hero, claiming that he learned a lot from their duel. With an honest smile on his face, he admits that he lost, and when our boy sees this, his mood lights up as well, and he replies that he equally learned a lot from facing off against the third prince. Leon stretches out his hand for a respectful handshake, and the prince accepts in good faith. He apologizes for underestimating our boy earlier and his lack of insight, and our hero accepts it, responding that everything is good between them. The prince is very impressed by his maturity, which makes him curious to know about our hero's age. In response, the genius swordsman states that he turned 14 earlier in the year. Hearing this, Grier de Orwin is a bit embarrassed, so he laughs it off, realizing that he lost to someone younger than him in both swordsmanship and personality. After this, he suddenly stretches his closed fist toward Leon, asking him to take what's inside. The curious knight in training asks what it is, so the prince opens his hand, revealing the gold badge plate with the Orwin Kingdom's symbol on it. He tells Leon that the item is proof that the Orwin Kingdom's third prince is willing to do any kind of favor he requests of him in the future. Hearing this, our boy asks the prince why he's giving him something so precious. The prince states that he feels inspired by his loss against him, and feels that he owes him a favor at the very least for his troubles. Still wearing a cheerful smile on his face, Grier admits that he even feels fortunate to have lost to someone like Leon. Our boy eventually accepts the gift, and as the third prince walks away, he comments that he's sure they will someday meet again. Surprisingly, he says that he hopes Leon will still be better than him when that day comes, and claims that it would be fun trying to catch up to him until then. After talking with Leon, he goes over to Lemmer to admit his defeat. He assures the instructor that he lost the best against him, and the red-haired elf just excitedly agrees with him as if he knew such a result was certain. That's when Grier tells Duke Tartan that it's time for them to get going, and while the latter appears to be a bit taken aback by this, he ultimately follows his prince's command. Before leaving, however, Grier suddenly remembers that there is something he has to do right away. While the third prince sets out to do this last thing, we see Leon recalling something about his past life. As he walks out of the training hall, he remembers how he always had to carry out all his missions without any payment. But now that he's received a gift from the prince, he wonders if it's always been normal to be awarded for your efforts. He stares at the gold plate badge with a satisfied smile on his face, and admits what a weird feeling it is for him to have received such a precious item. Finally, he can't help but think that this life is surprising him in ways that he didn't expect. Afterward, the scene shifts to Grier talking about his experience during the duel. The patriarch seems a bit disappointed by the lesson that the prince learned from the duel, but Grier insists that Leon helped him reflect, so he could realize that he wasn't actually the best like he initially thought. The prince claims that Leon was like an already trained swordsman. He even goes on to point out how he's never seen a trainee like that, even though he had already been in many duels throughout the 6 kingdoms. Although Leon is younger than him, he can't help but admit that he learned a lot from him. After the patriarch hears all of this, he finally starts to understand what Grier is talking about. This is when the prince reveals that he intends to go back after their meeting, claiming that he wants to train his body and solidify his mind like our hero. As such, the patriarch bids the young prince farewell and asks him to thank the king for the letter on his behalf. Grier assures him that he'll pass on the message, and then thanks him finally before taking his leave. On the way back home, Tartan tries to get Grier's attention, but the prince doesn't really seem interested in whatever he has to say. Regardless, the Duke expresses his feelings, pointing out how unnecessary it was to reveal his hidden powers, and even use the Pier's sword technique during the duel with Leon. Tartan thinks all of that was a bit too much, so he reminds the prince that it's important he hides his powers. But before he could finish talking, Grier bursts into laughter and cuts him off. The young prince admits that he definitely went overboard back there, so the Duke also adds that giving Leon the golden plaque was completely unnecessary. However, this is where Grier openly disagrees with him. He explains that Leon showed him goodwill, even though he could have gotten mad that the prince underestimated him so much at first. Despite the insults, the swordsman was polite until the end, and Grier reveals that this is the reason he had no choice but to act accordingly. Besides, Leon also showed him a technique that could also be considered a secret one, so they're basically even on that front. Duke Tartan agrees, but still tries to make his point about the plaque. Grier already knows what he's going to say, so he just cuts him off, claiming that the gift was an investment. The Duke is stunned to hear this, so he asks the prince what he means. In response, Grier explains that Leon is sure to become a great figure one day, even without being of direct lineage. And this is because he already has that level of skill, personality, and mentality at his young age. As such, he makes the Duke understand that it would be an advantage to him if he had someone like that on his side in the future. Needless to say, Tartan is surprised to see that his prince is looking so far into the future. The young prince just laughs in response, however, claiming that he's better off dead if he can't think that far after getting born into the royal family. As they continue their journey, Grier starts thinking about Leon again, already curious to see how much better he'll be the next time they meet. Meanwhile, back in the patriarch's throne room, the butler comments that he's happy that his grandson, Leon, has been acknowledged by the prince of another kingdom. The old nobleman asks the monocle-wearing guy what he's talking about, so the butler points out that it's been ages since he saw the patriarch smile. Well, it turns out that the old blonde guy didn't even notice his own facial expression, so the butler informs him that he's been smiling ever since the prince mentioned his grandson's name. Hearing this, the patriarch just tells the butler that he's mistaken, suggesting that he's getting too old. Regardless of the taunts, Lowen, the butler, tells the patriarch that he's still concerned about what Duke Tartan said, so he asks the nobleman what he's going to do about it. Upon being asked this question, the patriarch's mood changes, and a very solid scowl appears on his face. He doesn't say anything, and just sits in his chair, frowning without a response. In a flashback scene, we get to discover what Tartan said that could bother the old men so much. In this scene, the Duke announces that he has news other than the prince's letter. The patriarch gives him an audience, and so Tartan reveals that it's a message from the Orwen Kingdom's king, Lekros Elberton to Orwen II. The red-eyed man braces himself for whatever news it might be, and that's when Tartan informs him that the 5 darknesses have begun moving again. We are then immediately greeted with red and black silhouettes of some ominous figures, potentially signifying the future antagonists of the story. The scene changes, and in the present, we see Lemmer commending all his students for their performance against the Orwen Kingdom's knights in training. Because of how good they were, the instructor seems to think that they're now ready for the next stage, so he reveals that he's going to proceed with some very special training the following week. However, from the look on the trainees' faces, it's pretty obvious that they're not ready for all of that. Feeling nervous and slightly terrified, the green-haired kid, who's already made it clear that he's afraid of most things, quickly asks the instructor what he means by this special training. It's at this point that Lemmer confirms all their fears, explaining that what he has in store for them shouldn't really be called a special training, because, in reality, it's actually going to be a real battle. He makes them aware of this, and then scares them some more by suddenly telling them to be prepared to see real blood when the training starts. While the elf is busy terrifying his students, we see a place south of the Zygarde territory. This place is basically a snowy forest, but this is also where the mountain bandits reside, and this group of thieves call themselves the Snow Tiger Claw. These guys are partially associated with the North and South Alliance, and the main way they've been earning money is by receiving fees to let people pass through a particular road in the mountains that they blocked. Unfortunately, it appears that their activities have been getting a lot more violent as of late. Lemmer continues his little story and informs the trainees that the Snow Tiger Claw bandits in the mountains have been stealing items from merchants and killing people too. Hearing all of this, one of the anxious students asks if their mission will be to eliminate this nuisance of a group, to which the elf replies that it was supposed to be at first. Of course, the trainees are surprised to hear that he's talking in the past tense, so they ask why, wondering if the mission changed and why they can't just ambush them. The instructor immediately cuts them off while they're still whining and making suggestions, however, bluntly telling them that they can't just ambush the bandits. Lemmer then informs them that the Snow Tiger Claw ambushed a village south of the mountain and killed all the villagers before setting it on fire and running away. As you can imagine, the kids are horrified by such news, and that's when their instructor finally explains that their mission is actually to first of all track down the bandits, before eliminating them. He informs his trainees that the mountain bandits are all aura users who used to be pretty famous, so he advises them not to let their guards down. After making this clear to them, he suddenly drops another shocker, telling them to get ready because they'll be leaving the following evening. In the next scene, we see the white-haired knight in training splitting a leaf in two with her blade. With a hint of sadness on her face, she thinks about how she wanted to work on her posture before leaving the next day. Unfortunately, it's not going as well as she wants it to. She recalls how Leon's stabbing was flexible and smooth, but she can't recreate the technique, and she doesn't even get what she's doing wrong. At that moment, she looks over at the training hall, and feels that Rain must be training hard in there too, so she contemplates going to ask him for guidance. However, after a brief thought, she looks away, deciding not to go, because she doesn't want to interrupt his training session. As such, she decides that she'll keep trying on her own until she's able to get it right. Without further hesitation, she gets back to swinging her blade in an attempt to recreate Leon's strike. Lunan remains out there training by herself, not knowing when the hours fly by. We get an idea of how long she's been at it when we see the reflection of the sky from a puddle of water, revealing that the sun is already setting. By this time, the white-haired trainee decides to finally take a break, so she lies on top of a huge rock to rest and relieve her exhaustion. Apart from fatigue, she also seems to be a little disappointed by the results of her lengthy training session. Apparently, her attack has even gotten weaker than it was in the beginning. However, her movement now seems to be a lot smoother. With that, she's satisfied and feels that it should be enough for one day. Once again, she looks over at the building, thinking that Leon should still be training there. Lunan wonders if she should go and say goodbye to him before heading home, but then she remembers something that changes her mind. Apparently, she's been promised ice cream if she can return home early, so she decides to ask him about his technique the following day instead. Lunan heads home early, making a mental note to give Leon some ice cream when she sees him later. On the way home that evening, the white-haired trainee is followed by an unknown figure, and when the guy gets close enough to her, he calls her name to get her attention. Hearing the voice, she turns around to see who's calling her, and the moment she sees the face of this ponytailed dude, she's instantly terrified. It turns out that she recognizes him, but she doesn't look pleased to see him in the slightest. The man walks up to her with a smile on his face, claiming that it's been a while since they last saw each other. From his face and voice, Lunan identifies him as Syria, someone who belongs to her family. When he sees that she still remembers him, the smile on his face widens, and his purple eyes shimmer in relief. In case you haven't already noticed the resemblance, this guy is actually our airhead girl's brother. Mr. Ponytail just starts laughing when he sees the look on her face, and teases her, asking why she is so sad to see him again. He admits that it's quite upsetting to see her look at him like that, and his tone suddenly changes when he reminds her that he told her not to make that face. Hearing this statement, chills run down the girl's spine as she starts to become afraid. Syria immediately changes the topic, and then goes on one knee, before suggesting that Lemmer's training must be pretty good because she's gotten a lot stronger than he expected. He tells her that he's proud of her, but the girl doesn't seem too excited by this remark. Despite being proud of her, Syria suddenly expresses his immensely creepy disapproval of her fighting in wars or duels that would put her life at risk. Seeing his terrifying expression, Lunan screams in fear as she falls, and Syria seems disappointed that she's already forgotten everything he taught her in such a short while. As a result, he decides that he'll have to remind her everything from scratch. The trainee just stays down, feeling absolutely terrified of her older brother when he asks if she still remembers her old pet squirrel, named Ruby. Just then, he reaches into his back pocket or something and pulls out a small squirrel, sleeping peacefully in his hands. Syria shows her the cute creature and then suddenly starts smiling again like a psycho, feeling confident that his sister will remember her old pet now. He's also certain that she'll recall how her old pet squirrel died, as well as what happens if she doesn't listen to him. The innocent and terrified girl begs Syria to wait, because she already knows what's coming next. She even tries running toward him to stop him from doing what he has in mind. But while she's still screaming, this cruel dude squashes the poor woodland creatures with his hand, turning it into a bloody mush. Lunan stops in her tracks at the sight, horrified when she sees the manner in which he murdered the squirrel. Just as the wicked older brother had predicted, this gory sight triggers the traumatic memory of Ruby's death. The girl remembers how her pet squirrel died, and how her cold-hearted brother was responsible for it as well. Frozen in fear, she just stays on her knees and keeps staring at his face until she can't hold it in anymore. Lunan absolutely loses it, and begins screaming as the trauma hits hard once again. She doesn't stop, and just holds her head, hoping that the pain would leave her eventually. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because while she's yelling in the middle of the street after dark, her psycho brother just makes things worse by saying the kind of twisted thing a psychopath would say in such a situation. Syria leans closer to his sister while she's freaking out, and then whispers in her ear, telling her that she belongs to him. He tells her that she's his possession until the chosen day comes, and even though she's still screaming, it doesn't deter him from whispering more sick things into her ear. Lunan finally stops her shrieks so she can catch her breath, and as she's gasping for air, the psycho warns her not to do anything difficult or dangerous. Syria claims that this is because she needs to stay alive, and she also needs to do nothing until he tells her otherwise. As the cruel brother looms over the terrified girl, waiting for her to process the situation, we get a sense of someone approaching from the side. All of a sudden, there's a loud bang as something shatters nearby. Syria seems more irritated than bothered by whoever made the noise, and remains seated in his position with a calm expression. On the other hand, Lunan is simply grabbing her head as if it was going to fall off, and we see a sword cut through the air in front of her. Zooming out, we see that our hero has finally arrived at the scene, standing between the siblings to figure out the situation. It doesn't look like he's in a mood to exchange greetings, however, as his pissed-off face demands the scumbag psycho to reveal his identity. Things are getting rather spicy, and this new villain seems like he might prove to be a challenging opponent for our hero. What's the reason for the bad blood between the siblings? And for what reason is Syria trying to traumatize his sister? Also, who are the 5 darknesses that were revealed earlier?